to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, April 16th, 2015. Sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Don is in our control room. He's already answering phones. People are already loading up the lines. And before we get into the news, I want to do a special little shout-out to station KLID, 1340 AM. They are now carrying this show on the air in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. So aloha, KLID, and all of those listeners as well. We're glad to have you on board our little truth warp drive, as it were. Okay, now then. Story coming out of ShareEverything.com, and this is hammering a point we already know, but it's great that more and more people are paying attention to this. Remember all those people who were there pushing for war with Iraq and were still mired in it? We'll be talking about that a little bit more detail. Was sold to us with the claim that Saddam had nuclear weapons. He was going to wipe us out in 45 minutes. And Iraq was behind 9/11 and Iraq was aiding al-Qaeda, all of which turned out to be complete fantasies. Iraq was totally in compliance with the United Nations Security Council resolutions regarding its weapons of mass destruction, most of which had been sold to Iraq by the United States. Even George Bush, on video, admitted Iraq really didn't have anything to do with 9/11. It was just convenient to say at the time. And as a matter of fact, Saddam Hussein's Iraq, being the only secular government in the Middle East, was actually ideological enemies with al-Qaeda. And these same people who lied us into that war in Iraq are now trying to lie us into a war with Iran, and we need to stand up and say, not again, no more. Fool me once, and so forth and so on. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Go long guillotines and rope.
Start plucking them chickens and boiling the tar.
Mike, that news break with Obama saying he's with the veterans, all the way, and how come his kids ain't with them on the front lines? How come Biden's kids ain't with them on the front line?
Oh, because no, because Obama's kids are all suffering from asthma due to human-caused global warming, or so he claimed last week.
Ain't there a vaccine for that?
They probably will be by the end of the week here. And, it's one thing for Obama to say that, but it's absolute nonsense when you look at the continuing problems with the Veterans Administration, where they're just neglecting these returned, wounded, crippled veterans until they die. Then they rewrite the paperwork to make it look like they've been under treatment instead of just being neglected to death. And, of course, we know Obama, anything he says is nonsense. When he was campaigning in 2008, he was out there saying that first thing he was going to do as president was end these wars and bring our kids home. Obviously, didn't happen. And, at this point, it's like the old joke. How do you tell if a politician's lying? Their lips move.
They're all puppets. Every single one of them is a puppet, just a shell company basically of the people behind them. It's pretty sad individuals, these people.
They're very happy about what they're doing. They're very comfortable with it. They're all sociopathic. But our political machine right now goes out and scouts the most convincing liars they can find, and that's who become the candidates.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to ask you something with the Russian on May 9th, the Victory Day Parade. When's the last time an American went there?
I have no idea. They didn't invite me, so I generally don't pay attention to these things.
I just think, it's sad that I think Russia gave, I think they asked Obama or one of the people to attend, and it's just sad how that was an important day in history, and not one of us is going.
Yeah, well, this is all more about that. The Russians are bad. We don't even go to tea and crumpets with the Russians. The Russians are bad. And it's just part of that whole propaganda idea of othering Russia. Those are the other people, and you are part of these people and your tribal allegiances and so forth and so on. And
with Greece, I was reading about the possible getting missile technology from Russia. I don't think it will probably be the S-400 just because Greece is still a NATO country, right? I mean, I don't think you would give them access to something like that, right?
Greece already has the launchers for the S-300 and the radar control systems. They're just getting additional missiles from Russia, and if my understanding is correct, those S-400s will fit on the rails and plug into those computers. And they're trying to make a big deal about, how bankrupt can Greece be if they're buying missiles from Russia. We don't know that Greece bought them. Russia may be giving Greece military aid to hold off a direct invasion of Greece by the rest of Europe to keep them from defaulting and leaving the EU and triggering this derivatives crisis.
Yeah, that missile system will do it.
That missile system will definitely deter the airstrikes, but of course, naval invasion, if you look at how Greece is. And to add to all their troubles, of course, they had a pretty sizable earthquake there in that region earlier today, which is known for major quakes and really powerful volcanoes.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. Now then, Iran is sticking to their original understanding on the P5+1 framework deal. The sanctions must be lifted on the day the deal is signed. They're reiterating this was the framework agreement. And they're saying if their sanctions are not lifted, there is no deal. There is no agreement. Now, Netanyahu and his butt boys in Congress have in effect moved the goalposts on the Iran deal by putting together this law mandating a 56-day delay after the deal for Congress to satisfy itself that Iran is in compliance, which they won't. And the intention is obvious. They're trying to kill the deal. Netanyahu has said, I will find some way to kill this deal. And he has, with the help of these traitors, these violators of the Logan Act, inside the United States Congress, who are getting very large campaign donation checks from AIPAC. Now, earlier today on Fox News, they're already out there trying to sell the idea that the coming collapse of the P5+1 deal is somehow Russia and China's fault. It's not our fault for changing the agreement. It's not our fault for, listening to Israel to kill this whole situation. And Israel's in the Israeli media. They're saying this is a victory for Israeli foreign policy. They're bragging to the rest of the world that the United States is controlled by the Israeli government. But Fox News wants you to think that somehow Russia and China are behind the collapse of the P5+1, which they'll go on saying as they march your children into Iran here. Let's see. Jewish Times. Israel called a Senate bill requiring the U.S. Congress to review any nuclear agreement with Iran an achievement for Israeli policy. They're not even hiding the fact that this is their doing. Now, during the Holocaust commemorations, Netanyahu came out and said, Iran is the new Nazi power. I would not be so quick to say that. Okay, the Nazis had concentration camps. Okay, what nation has concentration camps right now at places like Abu Ghraib? Well, it's not Iran. Let's see, the Nazis lied to start wars in Poland. Iran hasn't actually invaded anybody in 200 years, but the U.S. certainly lied about Saddam's nuclear weapons to go into Iraq, and Assad's gas, trying to get us in there. Let's see, the Nazis used torture. What nations are using torture? Well, that's Israel and the United States here. I mean, if you actually go back and you know anything about Nazi Germany, Iran is at the bottom of the list of nations to compare to it. And the United States and Israel are very much up there at the top. But Netanyahu is convinced we'll all listen to his words and say, ooh, Iran, they've got swastikas. We have to go kill them for you. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about Israel, of course, is having their yearly festival of reselling the Holocaust to the rest of the world so they can sit there and play victim, and we will send them money and not argue against their policies against the Palestinians, although that seems to be wearing out. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the commentators in Israel are saying that the Holocaust is fading from memory, and despite all the endless movies coming out of Hollywood about Nazis and Hitler and Holocaust, and and Santa Claus versus the Nazis, and vampire Nazis, and zombie Nazis, and every possible way they can think of keeping this in front of us, and they're very, very concerned that the Holocaust is fading into history. Well, yeah, whatever it is that happened or did not happen, happened in the middle of the last century. In fact, the first half of the last century. I'm in my 60s. All that stuff happened before I was born. And yes, events fade into history, but Israel's entire political rationalization for doing what it does to its neighbors is rooted on that, we can't have another Holocaust. And they're out there flinging Holocaust at everybody, and they're calling Iran the new Nazis, and anybody they don't like they call the new Hitler. And you know what's really ironic about all of this? Hitler was a jerk. He wrecked his own country. He got suckered into this war to destroy Germany's resurgent economy, and he blew it. And I have zero respect and admiration for the gentleman outside of the Volkswagen, which was a pretty cool car. I think the punishment for any world leader that messes up that badly should be anonymity and oblivion. But the irony is Israel is so dependent on maintaining that whole story of the Holocaust and the Nazis and Hitler, they're giving Hitler what he wanted. They're making him immortal. They're preserving his name down the corridors of time to future history. I think we ought to just forget about the guy completely. I mean, we certainly have problems today, right before us, that our attention should be focused on, not things that happened before we were born. There are genocides and tortures and cruelty happening right now that should be uppermost in our mind. Not constantly patting Israel on the head and saying, there, we understand, over things that happened before the vast majority of us were even born. But Israel milks the story of the Holocaust. They protect and guard it jealously. They attack anybody who expresses any doubt about the Orthodox telling of the Holocaust, even though many of the claims made about the Holocaust have been completely disproven. Science has caught up with them. We ran a poll on my website. Were you alive during World War II? As expected, the vast majority, no. This all happened before they were even alive. It is an event in history. It's not current events. It's not current news. It's time to let it go away. Now, European Parliament members are demanding pressure on Israel to free these Palestinian lawmakers that Israel has just arbitrarily grabbed and thrown in jail. In a couple of cases without any charges, just punitive solitary confinement, administrative detention. Because Israel doesn't want them going to the Knesset and voting on issues. That's how Israel gets what they want through the Knesset. Anybody who's going to stand up against it, I'll toss them in jail till the vote's over. Now, here's a very alarming story that came out of Jewish Times of America, and they were actually saying this is good news. But Bloomberg News did a poll that found 67% of Republicans would support Israel even if Israel and the U.S. interests diverge. So if Israel says blue and the U.S. says red, 67% of Republicans would go along with Israel and defy their own government and the interests of the American people and this nation. Well, I have a message to those 67% of Republicans. Move to Israel if you love it that much. Same comment for all these candidates running for office of the United States of America next year who start every campaign with a trip to the Wailing Wall to get their picture taken with the yarmulke and saying, I'm a friend of Israel. I have yet to see in the run-up to the 2016 campaign any of these candidates get up and say, I'm a friend of America. They're all out there campaigning on how hard they can kiss up to Israel. And it's embarrassing. It's humiliating. In these troubled times, America needs leaders who are going to put America first, second, and third. And foreign entanglements, which George Washington warned us against, way down at the bottom of the list of priorities. All righty, let's see. Barack Obama issued a statement that Iranian troops operating in Iraq must be under the command of Baghdad, under the direct control of the Prime Minister Haider Abadi, the U.S. puppet ruler that was installed after Saddam Hussein was lynched over the claim that he had nuclear weapons of mass destruction, which we now know he did not. But it seems almost cross purposes, because we're seeing a story over at antiwar.com where the White House has said no new military aid will be sent to Iraq at this time, despite Abadi's calls for more military supplies. It almost seems like the Iraq policy is beginning to fall apart. Of course, we understand that ISIS is as a phony, made-up enemy as Al-Qaeda was. ISIS is 200 guys in a video production unit making up all these videos. Ooh, ISIS is bad. And all the U.S. has to do now to keep this century of warfare going is they'll send the actors into a country and say, I'm ISIS, come and get me. And the U.S. attacks and says, we're not really at war with Syria or Iraq, but that's where ISIS is and that's where we have to bomb. Meanwhile, as we've seen over in Syria, the U.S. is bombing economic infrastructure in an effort to collapse the government of Bashar al-Assad. Oh, no, we're not after Assad this time. I mean, never mind the fact the U.S. has been trying to get Assad out for going on 4 years. Oh, no, now we're after ISIS. ISIS is the new global strategic whack-a-mole. Wherever the U.S. needs to invade, that's where ISIS will show up. Now, there's a lot of people who've joined ISIS because it seems to be very effective right now, and apparently there is a huge military force on the road to Baghdad right now. They're being called ISIS or Al-Qaeda or these other groups. But what we're dealing with here in Iraq is very simple. The people of Iraq are sick and tired of living their lives under a U.S. puppet, and they're kicking the puppet out. The same thing the Iranians did in 1979. The same thing the Cubans did when Batista was kicked out and Castro went into power. It's an ongoing pattern. More about this when we come back, and we got a phone call waiting. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to give you a little historical background, which will help you understand why the U.S. is bombing and killing so many people across the face of planet Earth right now. Since the end of World War II, U.S. foreign policy, the building of the American empire, has been primarily affected by going into countries, kicking up civil discord, unrest, overthrowing the legitimate elected government of that country and replacing them with a U.S. puppet ruler. Some of the more well-known cases are Iran in 1953, when the CIA overthrew the democratically elected Mohammad Mossadegh and replaced him with the Shah of Iran. Then there was Chile in 1973, where the U.S. government went in and overthrew the government of democratically elected Salvador Allende and replaced him with the dictator Pinochet. Same thing with Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, Batista in Cuba, and since the end of World War II, the U.S. has tried to do this over 50 times to other countries, including at one point France, our supposed friend. And it used to work because the people of these countries would just obediently follow their new U.S. puppet ruler the way they had followed the previous government. But the model began to break down in first of all, with the Cuban Revolution, which is why the U.S. has carried a grudge against Cuba all these years, and really began to take off in 1979 when the people of Iran kicked out their U.S. puppet ruler, the Shah of Iran, and his secret police, the Savak, who'd been taught by the CIA how to torture dissidents. And the model has been further eroded in Ukraine, where the U.S. overthrew the elected government January of last year. And all of a sudden the people of Ukraine said, well, Kiev doesn't represent us anymore. We're going to exercise our right to self-determination as set forth in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we're just going to break off our own little country and go our own way, which is why we've got this horrible war going on in Ukraine. The people of Libya were very unhappy when the U.S. went in and took out Gaddafi, put in a puppet ruler and a private central bank. They're trying to take their country back. And now the people of Yemen are trying to take their country back, and the people of Iraq are trying to take their country back. But the U.S. government doesn't want you understanding that these nations are all trying to kick out U.S. puppet rule. So they don't tell you these are the people of the nation, the Iraqis, the Yemenites, the Libyans. Oh no, they're Al-Qaeda, they're ISIS, they're rebels, they're terrorists, they're warlords, to try and destroy any sympathy for these people whose only crime is they want their country back from foreign rule. That's all they want. They want Iraq for the Iraqi people. They want Libya for the Libyan people. They want Yemen for the Yemen people. That's all they want. But the U.S. can't stand for that. And that's why we're in Iraq for the third time. We're into Libya for the second time. We're going into Syria. We're going into Yemen to slap these people around and say, look, once we give you a U.S. puppet ruler, you will obey them or bad things will happen to you. So when they say ISIS is marching on Baghdad, I'm not sure it's ISIS, because I think ISIS is just a couple of hundred actors and a video production crew to make those videotapes. This is the people of Iraq taking back their country from U.S. foreign puppet rule, just like Iran did in 1979. And apparently, they're in control of most of Ramadi, and they're on the highway to Baghdad. Fallujah is next. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. John in Barbados, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yeah, continuing on with this current nonsense. I read all sorts of reports, and half of them you can discount immediately. I mean, the reports coming out of Site Intelligence and Rita Katz, for example.
Oh, they're junk. They're junk. Anything from Site Intelligence, anything from memory, these are all known Israeli propaganda fronts.
I mean, a lot of the time, I'm looking at the newsprint media in the UK, and half of that is absolute garbage junk. They've lost all credibility. It's about time that these governments and media outlets understood the real meaning of the internet and how you can go on there and get real intelligent conversation about various issues.
Well, it's a little more subtle than that. What's going on is all of these governments are still playing the propaganda game by the rules that worked back in the 1950s and 1960s, where media was one way. The government would tell the media what to say, the media would say it, and the people would believe it because they had no access to alternative points of view. And the people of all these countries, the U.S. included, were very naive, dangerously so, very trusting, and just accepted what they were told so that they would feel really good about all the wars and mayhem going on. Now, I think our best sign of optimism for a brighter future is the fact that the governments of all these countries, U.S., Great Britain, were very late to understanding that the Internet and independent media have fundamentally changed the way in which information flows through our society as dramatically as when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing. And they were a little late picking up on that. And in that gap, they kept on saying the same old lies. They were very easy to debunk, to discredit. They came out with all these phonied up pictures and videos, which are easy to spot that they are complete fakes. And the American people are now developing a very healthy degree of skepticism about anything the government and the corporate media says. And that's a good sign. Same thing in Great Britain. Same thing all across Europe. All of Europe's leaders are still part of this anti-Russian coalition with the U.S. government, but all the people of Europe are saying, no, we don't want anything to do with this. Our businesses are suffering from the sanctions, and the last thing we want is another world war fought on our front lawns.
Well, I think, Europe is definitely on a split with America, but I'm looking at Obama's latest statement about, the foreign fighters in Iraq must come under the president or the prime minister of Iraq. However, only a month ago or less, the prime minister of Iraq appointed an Iranian general to run the whole military campaign. Where is this man coming from?
They don't think these things through. They just they get up in the morning and say, all right, what do we tell the people that will hold them from losing their temper for another couple of days, maybe another week? And that's what they say. The problem with the United States propaganda is it's all being developed by advertising agencies and public relations firms who are institutionally confined to thinking in terms of 30 seconds, 60 seconds, maybe a 2-week, maybe a month sales campaign. And past that, they're not thinking. And that's why American propaganda has lost its narrative. It doesn't have a consistent thread of an alternative reality to present in place of what's really going on. And that's why it's so self-contradictory. It bites itself. And again, more and more people are seeing through this.
Well, I was seeing this morning a report from Baghdad that the Ramadi has been completely cleared of ISIS. Then we get this report later today that ISIS are going down with this huge army into Baghdad. I mean, we just can't believe anything that the corporate media and, well, the mainstream, well, it's not mainstream.
No,
really.
no, we're the new mainstream out here. Well, you remember what Senator Hiram Johnson said, truth is the first casualty of war. And that's certainly true in the present day. Okay?
Well, I think that the whole system has discredited itself so much that I just don't believe a word they're telling me.
Well, neither does anybody else right now except the real diehard, I don't want to know what's going on population. John, thank you for the phone call. I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, you may not realize it, but you, the American taxpayer, have been forced to bail out not just Wall Street, but Ukraine. Ukraine is pretty much out of money at this point. But the U.S. taxpayers are on the hook because Washington, D.C. is now guaranteeing Ukraine's bonds. So Ukraine can go on selling them. And if the bonds default, guess who gets to pick up that loss? And now you're being asked to open your wallet again, this time for Iraq. Because this oil price war that was launched to try and cripple Russia's economy and deter them from interfering with the reconquest of Ukraine has backfired. And it's harmed every nation with an oil economy. Saudi Arabia, Canada, U.S., Venezuela, and Iraq. They're now in serious trouble. And they are now requesting funding from the IMF, the U.S. taxpayers, and the U.S. Export-Import Bank, again the U.S. taxpayers, to finance purchases of 10 planes from Boeing. You American taxpayers, you're just so generous, with money for Wall Street and money for Ukraine and money for Iraq and money for Israel, and you don't care that our roads are crumbling apart and our bridges falling down and our irrigation system out west is just full of leaks here. Those things aren't important. You're just so generous with your money to the rest of the world. You ought to be proud of yourselves, really. Now, down in Yemen, the U.S. coalition, which is really down there following the U.S. agenda. See, the U.S. knew they were going to have to go back into Yemen because they were there back in 2012. They kicked out the elected government of President Saleh, and they put in a puppet ruler. And now the people of Yemen want that puppet ruler out. But the U.S. understands, especially as we head into another election year, selling yet another intervention in a country we've already intervened in and claimed success is a tough sell. It's a vote loser. So the U.S. asked Saudi Arabia to take the lead, and we're going to pretend this is Saudi Arabia helping to put the puppet back on the throne, who, by the way, is hiding out in Saudi Arabia right now. And so they're in there, and they're bombing the people of Yemen. They're bombing those units of the Yemen military that still support the former elected President Saleh. But the coalition's beginning to fall apart. Apparently there's a big clash going on between Iraq and Saudi Arabia. Iraq is criticizing the Saudi air campaign in Yemen, which is killing a lot of innocent civilians. They blew up a dairy, killed 31 people. They bombed a school. The Saudis are out there saying, there's absolutely no logic to the comments made by Iraq. Yeah, actually there is. Apparently, in Yemen, some Egyptian soldiers who are part of this coalition of the coerced have been captured. And I love this story here in Investment Watch blog. Chaos Yemen, Al-Qaeda captures major airport oil terminal in South Yemen. They're not going to say, the people of Yemen take back their own resources. Oh, it's Al-Qaeda. And you know something? Al-Qaeda is a fake. It's a manufactured fake. It's Emmanuel Goldstein, for those of you who've read George Orwell's 1984. It's a made-up enemy with which to demonize those who oppose U.S. policies. And we know they're a fake. They keep on turning out to be fakes. Remember Adam Gadon, the American Al-Qaeda, their media maven. His real name is Adam Perlman. He's the grandson of a member of the board of the Anti-Defamation League. And then there was Yusuf al-Khattab, who used to run the Revolution Muslim website, which featured pictures of the Statue of Liberty with a hatchet in the back. And it turns out his real name is Joseph Cohen. It's all fakes and phonies. They're manufacturing an enemy for you to hate to obscure the fact that what's going on in all of these countries is these are people trying to take their countries back from puppet rule. That's what the Arab Spring has been about. The Egyptian people kicked out U.S. puppet Mubarak. They put in Morsi. The U.S. goes in, kicks out Morsi, puts in another U.S. puppet. It's all about maintaining control of the empire. And we're seeing a very bizarre repeat of the fall of Rome. Because Rome maintained its empire through military force. All the conquered provinces stayed conquered because they knew if they didn't, the legions would show up and slap them around. Then Rome kind of overextended itself, and it didn't help when they lost 3 entire legions up in Germany. Because they no longer had the force to police their empire. When the legions were over here, this province would break off, and the legions would scurry over there to try and recapture them, and this other province over here would break apart. And that's what's going on now. The U.S. has bitten off more than it can chew. And it's running around the globe. You know, Iraq was supposed to be a done deal. It isn't. In fact, according to General Wesley Clark, all of these wars of conquest of the oil-rich nations of the Middle East were supposed to be over with the conquest of Iran in 2008. And we are now in 2015. Now, the Saudi coalition has imposed a naval blockade on Yemen, including ships bringing food in for non-combatant civilians. That's collective punishment for daring to stand up to your U.S. puppet ruler. And by the way, that is a war crime. Perhaps because of all this that's going on, the United Nations envoy to Yemen has quit, saying he's interested in moving on to another assignment. So things are really getting out of control down there. Over in Syria, U.S. Special Forces have been caught red-handed on the ground in Syria, involved in combat operations. They're guiding U.S. airstrikes against Assad. Now, we're getting a report out of Egypt that Hosni Mubarak has passed away at the age of 87. When Morsi came in, Mubarak was arrested. When Morsi was kicked out and El-Sisi came in, Mubarak was pardoned. And we have not gotten an official confirmation by the Egyptian government, but several sources are saying that he did, in fact, pass away. Meanwhile, U.S. paratroopers have arrived in Ukraine as fighting intensifies in Donbass. Remember all this talk about, no boots on the ground, we're just offering assistance. Well, the boots are on the ground. U.S. combat forces are in Syria, they're in Ukraine. I think future history is going to look at this moment in time and say that World War III was well and truly underway. We haven't had a big bang like a Pearl Harbor, so that everybody looks at all these little individual conflicts, and says, oh, yeah, I guess it's a world war. Start writing those patriotic songs again, like Tom Lehrer did. Meanwhile, there's a lot of wet work going on in Ukraine. Poroshenko is apparently taking a very hard line against dissidents and opponents. A former Ukrainian member of the parliament, an active anti-Maidan activist, Oleg Kalishnikov, has been killed in his flat in Kiev. famous Ukrainian journalist shot and killed in Kiev. This is Oles Buzini, murdered near his home in Kiev. The purge is underway. Sergei Sukobok has been killed in Kiev. And in the Khmelnytsky region of Ukraine, the editor of Netachinsky Vestnik, Olga Moraz, has been murdered. Now, this does not look to me like the junta is stable or under control when they resort to this obvious of attacks on their own people. And remember, the whole justification for going into Libya was, he's murdering his own people. Well, apparently so was Poroshenko. But we're not going in there to slap Poroshenko around. We're giving him more money and more weapons. Let's see. Interesting article over in Op-Ed News. The only two tools in the U.S. tool bag for foreign policy, bombs and starvation. And it talks about how the U.S. has weaponized the idea of sanctions. Do what we tell you or we will interfere with the global economy so that you cannot get what is necessary for your country to operate. And the longest running such starvation blockade, of course, was against Cuba for daring to kick out their U.S. puppet, Batista. And then embarrassing the U.S. at the Bay of Pigs. If you really look at the stuff, it all ties together. It links back and there's a cause and effect. And they don't teach cause and effect in history classes in school. You're not supposed to see it, but you need to learn how to find it. We got to take a break for the news, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about what's going on over in Ukraine, about all the strange suicides and outright murders taking place among dissidents and journalists who are critical of the junta and Poroshenko's activities. Now, yesterday we were reporting that in addition to Lugansk and Donetsk, the region around Odessa is now saying they want to be an independent breakaway republic as well, and already the hammer is coming down. We just posted an article from the Ukrainian media where it's talking about how raids are being carried out by Kiev's Ministry of Internal Affairs and Maidan activists who are part of the group that executed the U.S. coup d'etat against the legitimate government of Ukraine last year. And they're attacking people who are demonstrating in favor of independence. And they want the status of a free port for the city, a free trade zone, peace through commerce. And apparently older pensioners have been threatened with physical harm for talking about independence. And apparently a lot of people were beaten, put in this car from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and taken to an unknown destination. Nobody knows where they are, what's going on, what's happening to them. This, of course, is all the hallmark of an absolute dictatorship. We're not bringing democracy to the people of Ukraine, which was the claim when we overthrew the government and installed the junta. Oh, we're bringing these people democracy. Oh, the former government, they were killing their own people. Well, look how many have died since then. Now, one thing that is going on in the background of all of this is that Malaysian airlines experts and government investigators are now able to get to the crash site of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 and actually examine what's left there, aided by people from the Donetsk People's Republic. Now, remember, this so-called international investigation headed by the Dutch, who are out there screaming that obviously, you know, Putin shot this plane down personally with his bear rifle. They never actually visited the crash site. Oh, it's too dangerous. We can't go in there. And apparently, along with collecting evidence, the Malaysian officials are determining that, in point of fact, not all of the bodies were removed from the crash. Now, the official international investigation headed by the Dutch claimed to have identified 296 of the 298 people who were on the plane. And according to the information we're now getting from the crash site, there's no way they could have possibly done that. And they're finding luggage, they're finding items of jewelry, and hopefully they're going to get some panels from the aircraft itself showing exactly how it was shot down. Now, as you know, earlier in the week, some of these private Blackwater mercenaries were sentenced to very long prison terms over this notorious 2007 massacre of innocent Iraqi civilians. And everybody's saying, yes, this was just, it needed to be done. But it underscores the fact that overwhelmingly these private mercenaries, who are not constrained by any kind of military code of conduct, get away with doing what they're doing. And the fact that these individuals were sent to prison is an exception to the rule, that these mercenaries operate beyond any kind of control or restraint or law. All right, turning to the economy here, the ruble passed 50 against the U.S. dollar for the first time since November, was trading at 49.9 against the U.S. dollar. The ruble is coming on strong. It's seen as a dependable, reliable currency and a coming alternative to the U.S. dollar, which is exactly the reason the U.S. is trying to go to war against Russia. This is not a war of America against Russia. This is a war of the Federal Reserve note against the Russian ruble and eventually the Chinese yuan and renminbi. All of this, all World War III, comes down to an argument over whose brand of paper and ink notes the world will use for the next 100 years. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Joe in Southern California. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Wow, okay. Got to me quick.
Yes.
Question. Serious question. Are you seriously thinking about running for president?
No, it's a joke campaign. I mean, I can't run for the presidency with any real chance of success. I won't kiss up to Israel, and I won't lie to the American people. I did inhale both times, and I enjoyed it. So, no, it's a humorous campaign. It's on the level of Pat Paulson's campaign. But I'm going to use it as a platform to basically put out some ideas for people to consider seriously when they're deciding which of the real, genuine candidates they can.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
now,
they can go for it.
Also, I'm on your website, and I'm trying to do the member sign-up.
Yeah, that got broken. I'm in the process of upgrading from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7. It's a very slow process because I can't make a mistake here. But if you drop me an email with the preferred username and password, I'll get you all set up, okay?
Sounds great.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. All righty. Ron Paul is out there warning that the U.S. dollar is in a huge bubble. Now, Ron Paul was being interviewed on Futures Now, and the dollar index is soaring very high, even though the ruble is catching up with it. But Ron Paul says the rally is not a sign that investors are seeing strength in the U.S. economy. This surge is simply a byproduct of a world awash in easy money. People can borrow Federal Reserve notes at virtually zero interest, and the Federal Reserve will just create them out of thin air, because that's how this all comes to be. Every Federal Reserve note in circulation, in your pocket, in your bank account, started as a loan at interest from that private central bank, which is why the debt will always be larger than the available money supply. The economy is very fragile. The indicators are bad. We've caught the government lying to us about the key indicators, like the unemployment, where they're still insisting it's in the single-digit range. But we know, even CNN admitted, we have 90 million plus Americans willing and able to work who cannot find jobs. Now, you can get out your handy-dandy little pocket calculator and figure out that 90 million out of a nation of 330 million, that's a lot more than just single-digit unemployment here. But the U.S. government likes to play these games. Oh, they're not unemployed. They're terminally disconnected from the employment market. They have all these little categories and fancy names, and they shuffle people off so they don't have to include them on that final calculation. Because if the American people found out that we now have a real unemployment rate greater than that of the Depression of the 1930s, people might actually get upset and vote out the incumbents next year. And that can't be allowed to happen. That's how, so, you know, Washington, D.C. will just give you a comfortable little lie to make sure that you're going to vote the same people back into office next year. U.S. current national debt exceeds $18 trillion. It's growing between 9 and 10% per year. Unfunded mandates are another $200 trillion. And we're looking at a derivatives exposure on Wall Street that is $90 trillion. It's just waiting to explode. And, of course, the government's going to go on changing the rules, and the Federal Reserve is going on creating money out of thin air, trying to keep this little Ponzi scheme going a little bit further. But at some point, it has to come crashing down. Now, as you probably already heard from the corporate media, the House of Representatives did go through with repealing the inheritance tax. And this affects maybe 5,000 wealthy families in the entire country. And it's going to cost the U.S. government $269 billion, which is going to go onto the national debt, which means your children's children's children will have to work to pay that off, plus accumulating interest. We'll be back after these few commercial words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, the former chief of the International Monetary Fund, Rodrigo Rato, is under investigation for money laundering. And apparently, the judge is also holding him accountable for credit card abuse that took place in Caja Madrid and Bankia banks, where he was the chairman. I guess this is how you get to be the head of the IMF, doing these sorts of things. All right, we're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Terrence in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
How you doing? I just wanted to, I saw the gentleman, the elderly fellow, speaking on Facebook, and he was speaking about what the tragedy that happened in South Carolina.
Yes.
With the officer killing the young black man. I'd say 50 because young because 50 is not old. I myself am a black man, and my 27-year-old son was murdered in a county jail in New Jersey. Because he went there on Friday, and Sunday he left on a stretcher, and he died of a cervical fracture of the 7th vertebrae.
Ouch.
Yes, sir. And I see those guys on the football field get a cervical fracture. They come out and they put him on a stretcher and they leave, and they never move again. Except for the guy Donald Byrd that played for the Jets, he started walking again. So that is a very catastrophic injury.
Yes, it is.
So the police. So the prosecutor's office told me that they're not going to prosecute anybody because my son had several altercations with the police while he was there in the facility. So, but they want me to believe that he suffered a cervical fracture, and then he kept fighting the police the rest of the day. Now, I know I'm black, but do they really expect me to believe that?
I don't think they care if you believe it or not. That's just their official story, and they're sticking with it. The situation.
That's it. That's the story.
Yeah,
right.
The situation with South Carolina is the problem isn't the cop just shooting this guy running away. It's that they lied about what happened, trying to claim the guy
and a black
took the taser.
Assisted him in the lie.
Yeah, exactly. And so did the corporate media. So did the corporate media. And then a couple of days later, the video comes out, and that's why this is such a scandal, because it has alerted all of America that when innocent Americans are murdered by the police force, that it is covered up routinely. We had that person. We had that interview the other day where they said the police officers are literally trained on how to justify a killing in the field, and now, of course, the American police forces are killing 55 times as many innocent Americans as terrorists are. But we're supposed to be afraid of the terrorists and love the police departments. I don't think so.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
I concur with everything you just said.
Well, listen, I am sorry about what happened to your son. It is a tragedy for any parent to have to watch their own child die, and again, the callousness with which the police departments and the governments and the corporate media are dealing with this is only going to add to your injury. And again, the police are killing everybody, all colors, races, religions, creeds, genders, orientations. This is just plain police brutality, where the police are turned into a force to try and keep the population cowed and under control and fearful. It's not working. We're getting seriously angry. But Terrence, I'm going to let you go here. Thank you very much for the phone call, and I hope things get better for you. We're going to switch over here now to Steve in Florida. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you, Mike. Yeah, that's it. It's a complete tragedy with these police. I can't see any reason why somebody that's locked up, probably handcuffed too, would sustain that kind of an injury. And that guy's supposed to believe that about his son. But anyway, the reason I called you, Mike, is sometimes I can't figure something out. Something doesn't mesh up for me. I saw an infomercial. Infomercial. And it was actually Ron Paul there in, living color. And he was doing an infomercial about the coming currency crash.
Yes.
And how to preserve your wealth. And then he's selling a product at the end of it. And I thought, man, this is not the Ron Paul I know. It's just like he doesn't. It's like it just seems so. It was all scripted. I could tell that, and it just didn't seem like the Ron Paul I know.
Well, he's out of politics now, and he's got to make a living somehow. And being a spokesman, he may very well believe this product is an important one. But
right.
It's like when you see all these movie stars who do these amazing pieces of art on film, and then all of a sudden they're turning up, pushing condos in Palm Springs or something. And it can be a little bit disconcerting, but I don't think there's that big a deal. I mean, if Ron Paul was out there pushing a bad product, I'd be concerned. But at this point, he's certainly right about the fact there's a major economic upset coming. It could happen at the end of this month when Greece defaults. And anybody who is not making some kind of preparations to continue their lives, disconnected from the banking system, you're just setting yourselves up to be food for everybody else.
Right. Yeah, that was the only thing that I could figure out is that Ron Paul realizes the average person would need some kind of tutorial or whatever, how to prepare for this, and that was the best thing that he could see, so he was endorsing it because he does know what he's talking about.
Yes, he absolutely does. I wish he was running again next year. I'd support him again, but he's been shown the door well and truly. Listen, we're running out of time on this segment. Thank you very much for the call, and we're going to try and fit in Glenn in Philadelphia in the next couple of minutes. What's on your mind?
Yes, hi, Mike. Hey, you know what? If Ron Paul feels the need to endorse Viagra to help prop up the economy, more power to him. He's already served.
It certainly didn't hurt Bob Dole, did it?
No. Actually, I was calling about this money laundering charge that you talked about with this politician or
former director of the IMF. Former director of the IMF.
Of the IMF. Thank you. I couldn't hear who it was. But, I mean, isn't pretty much anybody who accepts central bank issued promissory notes guilty of money laundering?
No. This is talking about laundering money for drug cartels and terrorist organizations. Yeah. Unfortunately,
I know, but in a more general sense.
Well, yeah. But I think the message here is to understand that all of these large, too big to fail banks are supporting themselves right now during this economic downturn by engaging in this criminal activity. And indeed, if they were to quit the criminal activity, their businesses would collapse. And I think that's what people need to understand right now. They are inherently criminal operations. Glenn, got to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we have been following the story of General Motors, or given all the bailouts they were given, Government Motors, and the scandal over the faulty ignition switches. And the scandal there is General Motors knew there was a problem and did not take action to correct it, resulting in many deaths. Now, the surviving family members mounted a lawsuit against General Motors for wrongful death of their families. And there are billions of dollars on the line. And yesterday, a federal judge basically threw out all the claims, saying that because General Motors is in the middle of a government-overseen bankruptcy and reorganization back in 2009 when this was going on, shields it from liability for actions the company made previously. In other words, the fact that the taxpayers were required to bail out General Motors indemnified it from its past bad actions. Unsafe switches in the cars. Basically, it's just a gift to General Motors by the federal judge. And we see more and more of this, where the judges will look at these monster lawsuits against banks, corporations, pharmaceutical companies, and say, oh, no, I have a reason that this cannot be allowed to happen. And that is fascism on display, because when government power and corporate power are aligned together against the general population, that is fascism. And that's not my definition. That came from Benito Mussolini, who won the Olympic gold medal for being a fascist jerk. And he said that fascism ought to be called more properly corporatism, because it is that blending of corporate interest and government power against the general population. Government's proper role in a healthy republic is to stand in the middle between the greed of the money junkies and what's best for the nation and the people as a whole, and arbitrate between the two. When the government goes completely over to the side of the money junkies, you're no longer a republic. You are a fascist economic dictatorship. Now, we're seeing an article in wolfstreet.com. Bankruptcies are suddenly soaring across corporate America, despite all this talk about a recovery. And we've had our worst first quarter since 2009. The U.S. government is still trying to say, oh, the economy grew just a little tiny bit, just enough to keep us out of recession. But their businesses are going out of business all across the United States. Not just in the oil industry that's been hit by this oil price war. Retail is closing. Healthcare, mining, finance. Bankruptcies are booming. The bankruptcy lawyers are having a field day. They're doing really well. Speaking of retail, a lot of people are very concerned over this closure of 5 stores by Walmart. All of a sudden, no warning to the employees, claiming that all 5 of these stores have serious plumbing issues that have to be worked on, and the stores will be shut down for at least 6 months. Now, a lot of people are questioning the cover story because none of these 5 stores has applied for a building permit for revamping its plumbing. And a lot of people are trying to interpret this in light of Operation Jade Helm, that these are going to be used for holding facilities and things like that. I don't think so. I think what's going on here is that Walmart is punishing their employees for demanding higher wages. Because Walmart was forced to raise wages just a little while ago. This is their way of striking back by shutting down 5 stores for 6 months, putting all those people out of work. And to save face with the general public so that we will go on taking our money into Walmart, they came up with this plumbing story, which does not hold water at all. Now, we're on the verge of another economic upset, worse than what we saw in 2008 when the mortgage-backed security fraud collapsed. And especially going into an election year, Congress knows that more bailout, another TARP, are going to work against the incumbents. So they're basically going back to something they did during the Depression of the 1930s, called the bail-in. And we've already seen this in Europe, starting in Cyprus, where if the bank gets into trouble, they just help themselves to their bank depositors' life savings. And they're able to do this because last November, Congress passed a law that redefined bank savings account holders as unsecured investors in the bank itself, meaning if the bank is losing money, you must share those losses. And they changed the ordering of priority of who gets paid in the event a bank collapses, putting the derivatives at the very, very top. And we know the derivatives exposure alone will wipe out most of these banks, which means everybody else, including those savings account holders, are going to get nothing. I maintain that right now the prudent thing to do is that you should have no more money in the bank than you need to cover your immediate obligations. And you should have everything else out of the bank, at home, under your own control. Some of it in cash, some of it in physical silver and gold. And I guess a lot more people are starting to do that, which is why all of a sudden we're seeing all these media calls about we have to end cash. You know, the criminals use cash, terrorists use cash, cash carries germs. You don't want that cash stuff. You want a piece of plastic. Because if they ban cash, then everybody's money goes back into the banking computing systems where it can be used to support the bank's reserve capital requirements. Money that you have in your pocket, that you have under the mattress, that you have buried in the mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation, the banks can't use that. But if you're doing everything with a plastic card, the money will go from one bank computer to another bank computer instantaneously, and the over $1 trillion in cash in circulation now goes back into the banking computers, and they can say, there's our reserve requirement, we can stay in business another day. Plus, obviously, it opens up your entire life to constant tracking by the banks and the government as to what you are buying. And I think a lot of people would rather not know, or rather the government not know what they're buying. For example, if they go on down to the racy lingerie store and they get a present for their wife for the anniversary, I don't want the government knowing about that. If I'm supposed to be on a diet and I stop at a bake shop for a jelly donut on the way home from work, I don't want the government to know about that. It's none of their business anyway. And we have a Fourth Amendment right to privacy, that the government may not look into our lives unless they have evidence an actual crime is in progress. And jelly donuts are still, at the moment, legal in this country. That may change under Obamacare, where the government will now say, we will decide your diet for you because we know what's best. We're the government, which is what they told us back in 1976 when they mandated that swine flu vaccination program that killed 50 times as many people as the flu did. Bernie Sanders is out there saying half of Americans have less than $10,000 in their savings account, which is true. Which is why the bail-ins may not work as well as the money junkies are hoping that they will. So the whole point of private central banking was to suck all the money out of the people and into the pockets of the bankers, and nobody had a plan what to do when they succeeded. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm going to do some flashbacks in this segment. As you know, Sunday is April 19th. It is Patriots' Day, the anniversary of the shot heard round the world, the start of the American Revolution, when we told King George III, no, we will not conduct our commerce using banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England to drive us into poverty. And that's why we call it Patriots' Day. There are two other anniversaries on the same day, which are very tragic. One is, of course, the ending of the standoff at Waco, where the U.S. government basically gassed a church full of women and children with a poison gas that is illegal to use on enemy troops in time of war. And there's been all this propaganda about how evil the Branch Davidians were and what a crazy this guy was. And when David Koresh took over the Branch Davidian compound, the first thing he did was he called the police to come and remove a meth lab, which the former leader of the religion, the church, had set up, and the police came and took it. They were all buddy-buddy. A little more than a week before this whole raid that started Waco, David Koresh and the local BATF went out shooting together. Koresh provided the ammunition. Now, everyone's been trying to make a big deal about the fact they had guns inside this church. Well, this is Texas. Everybody has guns. And the Branch Davidians funded their church, their commune, by buying broken weapons, repairing them, and reselling them at gun shows. Now, following the gassing and the fire, all of the Branch Davidian weapons that had been inside the compound were still inside the storage area because none of them worked. And I put up an article at whatreallyhappened.com with photographic evidence that when the BATF showed up to stage this spectacular raid for the press, they opened fire first. In fact, the very first gunshot shot David Koresh in his crotch area. And, of course, it went downhill from there. And there's a little backstory to that. Prior to Waco, the BATF had developed a very vile reputation of kicking down the wrong doors, killing innocent people. And Congress was getting ready to hold hearings as to whether the BATF should have its enforcement powers rescinded, go back to just being paper pushers, handling licenses. And so BATF leadership, they needed a spectacular publicity stunt to show how important they were, that there were dangerous kooks out there with guns that only the BATF could take down. And the evidence from the scene that we present in that article is the BATF just opened fire. Interestingly enough, the BATF's downfall about this whole situation was they invited the media along because they wanted lots of press coverage. And one of the people they invited was a friend of the Branch Davidians, and he got on the phone to David Koresh and said, David, the BATF is coming on out to raid you and take your guns. And Koresh said, well, you know, they can come on out here and look around. There's nothing working here. All of the working guns were out at a gun show being sold that day. So the BATF shows up, Koresh opens the door, he's promptly shot, and goes downhill. And it turns into this huge scandal. And the only way out for the government to not admit that they had botched this whole thing from top to bottom was to gas this church full of innocent women and children to death with a gas that is illegal to use on enemy troops in time of war, and then torch the place. And after it was all over, they bulldozed the entire site down 6 inches into the soil and transported the ruins of the church and the soil to a top-secret, undisclosed location because they didn't want anybody getting samples for forensic analysis as to just what chemicals had been used by the government on these people. Now, the other anniversary that we have on Patriots Day is the Oklahoma City bombing. And you need to go look at the page I put up there. I mean, there is so much evidence that this was another faked terror event for the U.S. government to push anti-terror legislation, new rules, suspensions, new bombing and everything. And by the way, here's a little wrinkle about these two stories you don't know. Congress had to have hearings on what happened at Waco, Texas. So the BATF collected up all the paperwork and all the evidence that hadn't been bulldozed and took them to one secure location. That secure location was the Murrah Federal Building, Oklahoma City. When that building was destroyed, all of the evidence Congress needed to find out what had happened in Waco, Texas was destroyed. How very convenient for the BATF. Early media reports, bombs were found inside the building, additional explosive devices. There was a second Ryder truck. There's more going on with Oklahoma City than I can go into in this broadcast. So go to whatreallyhappened.com and just look for the headline, Flashback, the Oklahoma City Bombing. I actually had a very good friend of mine, Connie Chung, and I'd known her from KNXT in Los Angeles, Channel 2, years ago. And she was there, and she caught wind that, as we have seen with so many of these other government hoaxes, there was a drill going on at the same time. An emergency drill. And the Oklahoma City Fire Department had been parked with their equipment on streets around the Murrah building before the explosion actually happened. And Connie Chung asked the fire chief why that had been the case, and she was immediately fired. So, now, a little more alarming developments here. Story out of Government Slaves. A military bulletin, actually an email from a U.S. Coast Guard Command Security officer, was leaked to INFOWARS and basically lumps militia members and patriots and truth activists with white supremacists and says they may launch terror attacks on April 19th, which means they're telegraphing another false flag to demonize anybody in the country who doesn't buy the official story. Now, over in congressional hearings that took place yesterday, House Foreign Relations Committee, they had testimony from former Russia Today host Liz Wall, who quit Russia Today in a very public spectacle of saying Russia's state media, they're full of lies. Now, her leaving Russia Today was stage managed by a neocon, James Kirchick, a former employee of Radio Free Europe, which is U.S. state media. And Wall went out there basically equating bloggers and the independent media with ISIS, saying that we are just as dangerous to the national security as ISIS terrorists. Bloggers, conspiracy theorists, people who don't believe the establishment narrative. We're a threat to the country. Not to be all rounded up and thrown in the ovens here. Now, out in California, Representative Ed Royce is out there saying conspiracy theories and dangerous internet bloggers. He's obsessed with 9/11, saying that ought to be rounded up and silenced. Really, have you ever heard of something called the First Amendment? The First Amendment is not there to protect the lies of political candidates, although some political candidates have actually gone to court to say that. Yes, I can lie about my opponent in a campaign speech. That's First Amendment speech. The First Amendment is actually there to protect the truth. And we're out here telling the truth as best as we can. That's why we don't get the $1 million paychecks and the hairstylists and the makeup and the fancy lighting and cameras that the corporate media does, because the corporate media's business is to mislead you, to sell you things. The latest car, the latest agenda, the latest war, the latest president. And that's not what we're in the business of here. Meanwhile, MediaWatchdogFair.org is taking corporate media to task for responding to every report coming out of the rest of the world as, oh, obviously it's a massive Russian propaganda campaign. We don't even need to comment on what they're saying. You know, about how they didn't shoot Flight 17. Obviously it's paid for propaganda. Meanwhile, of course, the U.S. government is spending millions and millions of dollars. And so is Israel, hiring people to sit on the internet and post their propaganda back and forth. They're obviously recognizing that they're in trouble. They've lost the trust and faith of the population, and they don't know what to do about it. But as long as that First Amendment is still in place, and as long as we are telling the truth and cannot be exposed for misleading the population like Saddam's nuclear weapons, we are protected by that First Amendment. We've got to take another break for news. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Don is still in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. I want to talk briefly about one of the stories we heard on the SRN News Break about how Christine Lagarde, who's the current head of the IMF, is out there saying they will not allow a delay in payment from Greece for its next payment due early May. And Greece doesn't have the money. And Christine Lagarde talks a good deal about the high ground of we do not allow this. We've never seen a developing economy or evolved economy that requires this. What's really going on is very simple. The IMF, the European Central Bank, they're all caught in a no-win situation. If they cut Greece any slack on the debt, every other member nation of the European Union is going to demand the same, because Greece is hardly the only nation in the European Union that is in serious trouble. And the money junkies don't want to write off any of that debt, and so they're having to take this hard line. And looking forward, that hard line is going to lead to Greece defaulting, leaving the European Union, and probably pivoting toward the Russian sphere of influence. Because Russia has already demonstrated with Cyprus that they are very easy and forgiving on these debt issues. They can afford to be. So, anyway. Now then, let's get on to politics here in the United States of America. Kicking off his campaign, Mark Rubio is attacking Obama on Israel. Now, to put this in context, how would you feel about a candidate who starts off their campaign attacking the president over Ireland or Italy or Venezuela, so forth and so on? It would sound very, very silly to the American people. What are you concerned about these other countries here? The president's job is the United States of America. And yet there seems to be this unwritten rule that, you know, Israel is somehow our responsibility. And it isn't. Israel is Israel's responsibility. The United States of America is the responsibility of the President and the Congress. They don't act like it, but that's how it's supposed to be in theory. Remember, in his farewell address, George Washington warned against foreign entanglements. Now, Sheldon Adelson, who owns a lot of casinos, I think he's still under investigation in China for bribing foreign officials over there, but he owns a newspaper in Israel, Israel Hayom, and that newspaper is just promoting Mark Rubio as hard as he can. And it is rather a point of shame and humiliation for the United States of America to see our politicians absolutely convinced they will not win an election unless they are sucking up to Israel as hard as they can. And certainly Israel has enough money to literally buy the Congress out from under the American people, which seems to be what has happened. Michelle Bachmann, who refuses to fade into obscurity, is out there saying that Obama's poor relationship with Israel will bring the end times and the return of Jesus. Ooh, it's the end of days, and when it's all over, Jesus is going to come down and invite me up to the big house. All right, we're going to take ourselves a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind now?
Wouldn't it be funny if they left Michelle Bachmann behind?
Yeah. We actually have a T-shirt we sell in our online store, and on the top, up above in big letters, it says, "The Rapture Happened," and then down lower in smaller type, it says, "You didn't make it."
Well, all I got was this lousy T-shirt.
Yeah. Oh, that's an even better one. I like that. The rapture happened and all I got was this lousy T-shirt. That's a good one. I like that.
Hey, that Mark Rubio's a fraud. You see, he goes, Hillary's the past, let's look to the future, and then he's like, blast Obama in Cuba. I'm like, that is the past, right?
Well, yeah. Again, they're just going to say whatever they think the people right in front of them want to hear, you know, to generate enough votes to where the vote riggers can take over and win the election for them.
And look at Hillary Clinton. I mean,
I'd rather not.
I don't. Her whole thing was, what was it? She wants to be your champion. It means she must be talking about the 0.1%.
Well, you know, she's out there trying to sell herself as the people's champion against the 1%, and yet her top donors are the 1%. J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup. They're just giving her huge amounts of money. But you know something? It's kind of interesting. Hillary's basically playing to the public awareness of just how corrupt Washington, D.C. is. Apparently, when she was over at Kirkwood Community College, she's out there saying that she will end Citizens United even if it takes a constitutional amendment. And she's just saying there's nothing there. It's like when Obama was promising he was going to end the war and bring our kids home in 2008. She's not going to keep that promise. For one thing, she can't. Anybody who understands the system understands Congress will never pass a law that cuts off their funding in any way. And to get a constitutional amendment, they got to get it through Congress and 3/4 of the states. And those states are filled with politicians who will never vote to cut off their own funding. Has Congress is always passing bills to raise their own pay. Has Congress ever passed a bill lowering their pay, taking a pay cut? Hasn't happened. Never will. These people are in politics because they're greedy. And Hillary can go on out there and rail against Citizens United, and we know how it is just open, you know, corruption is rampant in Washington, D.C. But because all the people in D.C. benefited from that corruption, they will never actually do anything to end it.
It's just a shame. You know, we've got 320 million people in this country, and people go, why can't we get anybody? Because the system is rigged.
Look at how they kicked out Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. He had far more grassroots support than any other GOP candidate, and they literally railroaded him out. Why? Well, because he wanted to audit the Federal Reserve. That can't be allowed to happen. And he's not absolutely 100% loyal to Israel. And he actually wanted to run the United States of America for the benefit of the United States of America and the American people, and that's why they did everything they could do to keep him out.
Well, one thing, if he ever became president, the first thing I would do is get rid of the Secret Service and move so many things around. I'd have, my own private army, because you would be assassinated.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, if he'd actually won the nomination, I was expecting that to happen. And
because they don't want somebody with that change. They want to keep status quo. But you know what? The status quo can't keep the way it's going because the country's on the verge.
The status quo is self-destructing right before our eyes, and that's why I say just stay calm, get some popcorn, and watch the show. It's tearing itself apart right now.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, you got it. We're going to let you go here. Now, speaking of Hillary Clinton, she's doing this little tour across Iowa in what she calls her Scooby-Doo van. I'm meeting with everyday Americans, and I'm just mingling with ordinary peasantry or people. And it's all fake, and it's staged. Apparently, in the last school meeting she went to, the students were pre-screened as to what they were going to say, and every other student who might have asked an embarrassing question were locked inside their classrooms, so they couldn't come out while Hillary was there, walking through the halls. And it's all stage managing here. By the way, somebody got a photo of Hillary's Scooby-Doo van in Iowa parked in the handicapped parking space. And apparently at that very same meeting, cell phones and cameras were confiscated before anybody was allowed near Clinton. They don't want any imagery or pictures or video going out that is not manufactured by her campaign. Over at Fox News, Megyn Kelly's already out there saying Hillary is totally insulated from the press. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Hillary Clinton's campaign to be President of the United States of America, and we are already hearing that access to her is tightly controlled. If you are not asking the questions you're told to ask, you're going to be locked in your classroom. The media is being kept away. Cameras and cell phones are being confiscated. It's completely under control. This is not going out and meeting ordinary Americans because ordinary Americans have cameras and cell phones, and they're going to ask embarrassing questions. That's the reality. Now, Hillary's out there with this little theater production on the road that she's just playing folks. Remember last year when she was out there saying, "We're not rich, Bill Clinton and I, we're not rich. We're poor. We're just as poor as you are. I'm poor, Bill's poor, Chelsea's poor, the maid's poor, the chauffeur's poor, our lawyer's poor, my publicist is poor, the upstairs maid, the gardener's poor. We're all poor, 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 poor." She obviously can't do that one this year because of all the questions surrounding the Clinton Foundation. And the Clinton Foundation has announced two little pieces of news. They're going to keep accepting money from foreign donors, and they are not going to unveil the policies under which the foundation is supposed to be operating as a charitable organization. It's like the email service. None of your business. Now, there's an interesting development over on the GOP side. Carly Fiorina says she's getting ready to run. She's considering being a candidate for president next year. And the primary advantage of that is that if Hillary Clinton is facing a female GOP nominee, there's a whole set of things that Hillary won't be able to talk about. She won't be able to talk about being the first woman president. She won't be able to talk about a war on women without being challenged. Won't be able to play the gender card, which we already know is a big part of Hillary's campaign strategy. Oh, you women are oppressed. Vote for me and I will make your life better. There's a rape crisis out there. They're basically bringing back a lot of the same issues that they were fanning up in the 1990s. The rape epidemic and the rest of it. Now, I have one concern about Carly Fiorina, and it's a minor one, I will grant you, but I feel like voicing it. I'm a huge fan of Hewlett-Packard equipment. I've got this calculator here that I've had for a great many years. It's durable, it's reliable, and it's a wonderful piece of equipment. And Hewlett-Packard's reputation was built on high-quality equipment. We used a lot of it at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and NASA. So when my wife and I were here in Hawaii and I set up my animation company, we bought Hewlett-Packard computers and other equipment, scanners, printers, and CD burners. And all of a sudden, we started having all kinds of problems. And I started looking into it. And Hewlett-Packard, under Carly Fiorina as the CEO, had started offshoring all of their manufacturing to places like Hungary, which don't exactly have a reputation for being high-tech manufacturers, the way China is. But they got the best deal from Hungary. And these CD-ROM drives were failing after just 2 weeks of use. And being here on Oahu, getting a replacement was problematic. And I came very close to missing deadlines. And it was certainly very difficult getting our business going with all of this stuff failing all the time. And what it tells me is that Carly's attitude is not to work to improve the quality of American products, but to make the cheapest thing you can and then pass laws saying nobody can sue, which has unfortunately been a tendency and a trend in the United States for quite some time. Can't sue computer and software makers. They're indemnified. Can't sue vaccine makers. They're protected by the Homeland Security Act. We had that federal judge who's thrown out the case against General Motors saying that General Motors is protected by the fact that they were in a government-managed bankruptcy in 2009. So, anyway. Now, Chris Christie is out there saying that it's time for cuts to Social Security. That's not going to win him a lot of votes, but a lot of people are acknowledging he is honest about it. Social Security is in trouble. And the reason Social Security is in trouble is very, very simple. Back in the 1980s, Social Security taxes were increased to build up a cash surplus for the surge in retirements among the baby boomers that is starting to happen now. Starting with Bill Clinton, that cash surplus was borrowed, moved over to the general ledger, and spent as general revenues by the federal government. That's where Bill Clinton got his magic federal budget surplus, by spending the Social Security funds and replacing them with Treasury bonds, which the government can now not redeem. And that's why you're hearing about Social Security is in trouble, the entitlements are too great, we've got to start saving some money someplace, so we're going to basically default on the American worker because they can't sue us and they can't affect our credit rating, is what it comes down to. Christie's honest in acknowledging Social Security is in trouble. He's being less than honest as to the reason why that is. Now, Chris Christie is on the warpath against teachers over what he sees as excessive pay, but isn't saying a word about the fact that New Jersey has the highest paid police officers in the country with a median salary of $92,000. And coupled with all of these recent incidents in New Jersey of wrongful killings by the police, I think maybe somebody ought to take a look at that, at least a pay cut, until they stop killing innocent people here. Over in Fairfax County, Virginia, police officer arrested for child pornography. Up in Chicago, the city, which is struggling financially, as so many are, is going to have to pay $5.5 million in reparations to victims of that secret police torture center that was made public not too long ago. And you know, people were tortured in there. Abu Ghraib stuff. Electric shocks. Waterboarding took place. $5.5 million does not even begin to cover that. And here's a very interesting article over in the Daily Bell, and this may have been in response to Fox News' recent comment that the real problem is that minority communities need to understand the police a little better and be more sympathetic. And so I'm looking at this article over at the Daily Bell saying, no, the police don't deserve any sympathy until they start treating Americans with respect and in accordance with their constitutional rights. And as long as they go on behaving the way they are, no, there isn't going to be any sympathy for them whatsoever. New Mexico just became the second state to abolish civil asset forfeiture. There's a huge backlash against this, and unfortunately, too many police departments across the country are now dependent on civil forfeiture to make their budgets, because all of the tax money is being spent on wars, Wall Street, Israel, and so forth. But some of the states are starting to stand up and say, no, no more civil forfeiture. because you're robbing people with a badge and a uniform, and they haven't done anything wrong whatsoever. Now, we're not even into 2016 yet, and already we are hearing accusations that the electronic vote machines that are being put out there for the 2016 election are wide open to fraud. The ABS win vote machines used in 3 presidential elections in Virginia, apparently the access password is ABCDE, and they get an F- in security. They're getting ready to basically steal the election either for Jeb Bush or for Hillary Clinton, or for which one of them has the most money to give to the vote stealers. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, yesterday was also, in addition to being April Fool's Day, was the 2nd anniversary of the Boston Marathon bombing. And they were laying it on thick to remind everybody how horrible it was in order that you not think too closely about what you were seeing. And now that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev has been convicted by his kangaroo court, his family is starting to speak up. And a lot of people were saying, well, there's so much obvious fraud going on. Why isn't the family speaking up? And it turns out Judy Clark, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's government-appointed attorney, had gone to them all and said, if you make any public statements, it might harm our chances at getting Dzhokhar Tsarnaev off. And so the family stayed quiet. And then, of course, Judy Clark goes into the court after Dzhokhar Tsarnaev has pled not guilty, and she goes to the jury and says, yeah, he did it. We know he did it. Everybody knows he did it. Now, you need to understand, Judy Clark is the government's go-to gal to bury the patsies and protect the official story. She was the attorney for Ted Kaczynski and a bunch of these other patsies who are set up for these false flag operations. And Tsarnaev's family is saying, what kind of a supposed defense attorney goes to the jury and says, yeah, my client did it? So, not surprisingly, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was found guilty on all charges. His family is now saying he should fire Judy Clark and file for an immediate appeal, because certainly Judy Clark's telling the jury that he's guilty is actionable. It's grounds for an appeal. And what's really sick about all of this, and more people are becoming aware of this, even I could have gotten Dzhokhar Tsarnaev acquitted, because there's a principle in our system about reasonable doubt. Guilt has to be proven beyond that reasonable doubt, and there is a reasonable doubt. And the evidence is right there. In looking at the photograph of the exploded bomb, it is in the remains of a black backpack with a recognizable white rectangle on the top. The photographs of the 2 Tsarnaev brothers prior to the explosion show them wearing light gray backpacks that don't look anything like it. Meanwhile, there was a group of men at that finish line dressed identically in black jackets and khaki pants, and one of them was photographed before the explosion with a black backpack with a white rectangle on top, and after the explosion, the same man was photographed running away without the backpack. On the basis of that evidence alone, the jury should have acquitted Dzhokhar Tsarnaev and start asking the government, who were these guys in the black jackets and khaki pants? Why aren't you investigating them? Why are you focused on the Tsarnaev brothers when the photos show that the backpack with the bomb couldn't have come from them? But again, this is not about defense of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. He's cooked. To protect the official government story of the Boston Marathon bombing, he is to be sacrificed. A living blood sacrifice on the altar of Moloch to preserve the government's image of infallibility. There hasn't been a railroading like this since James Earl Ray or Bruno Richard Hauptmann. Now then, let's talk a little bit about the F-35. World's most expensive fighter aircraft. It is a piece of junk, but because our government is unable and unwilling to admit they have messed up, they're still moving forward. The latest issue to surface, I mean, let's look at this thing. The can't fly in the fog, can't fly in the rain. The helmet control fire system, $400,000 per helmet, still doesn't work. The system to allow complete 360 visibility doesn't line up. The system to integrate data from multiple aircraft in the same squadron can't sort it all out. And now, apparently, the software system that maintains the fighter jet is giving false readings 80% of the time, telling the pilot that something is working when it isn't, or telling the pilot something is failing when it's perfectly fine. Now, they're rushing to get the first version of the F-35 out there and flying and ability to go into combat. And already, according to Michael Gilmore, Director of Operational Test and Evaluation at the Defense Department, this first version of the F-35 will be roughly the equivalent of the A-10. It will not be able to use its night vision system. It will not be able to carry more than 4 bombs and missiles. This thing is a piece of junk that you got to pay for. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has asked for $5.5 billion to outsource protection of U.S. satellites and their networks. Apparently, they've decided they can't do that themselves here. Now, remember when France canceled the delivery of the Mistral warships to Russia under U.S. pressure? It's coming back to haunt them because representatives of the government of India have greatly reduced their plan to buy French Rafale fighters and are instead saying they're going to go ahead and buy 5th-generation fighters from Russia, which are already able to outfly the F-35, and India won't have to worry about France reneging on the deal under pressure from Washington, D.C. Anyway. Now, last week we were talking about this ridiculous story where a student on a college campus was told that he needed a free speech permit to hand out flyers, that he had to get the college's approval of the content of the flyers, and even then would be confined to a free speech zone way off somewhere toward the parking lot. This is at Cal Poly Pomona. I'm familiar with that campus. The student has, fortunately, turned around and filed a lawsuit against Cal Poly Pomona for infringement of his First Amendment rights, and I hope he wins. And I hope those campus police and college administrators all lose their jobs, because the job of education is supposed to be to raise our children to live in the United States of America, and that means to understand what the Bill of Rights is and how it limits government abuse of us. Unfortunately, we've seen in recent years our educational system has been less and less about education and more about indoctrination. We've documented how the Common Core system is literally rewriting the Bill of Rights to brainwash our children into thinking it says something other than what is actually on that parchment or that hemp paper. To make them obedient workers, not ask questions, not see the cause and effect here. Very bizarre story coming out of Pennsylvania's Carlisle area school district. Wilson Middle School, a nurse, school nurse, refused to treat a patient because the patient refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. What's that got to do with handing out aspirins? That nurse ought to lose her license to practice here. Alrighty, let's see. Dangerous precedent. The federal government is trying to establish a legal precedent where the federal government is the owner of all water in the country. Now, we know that Nestle's CEO is out there saying that water is not a natural right of humans, that it should be commoditized and bottled and sold to profit corporations. And apparently the federal government is going along with that idea. And the problem with Nestle, besides the fact that they've been pumping water out of California's aquifers for 27 years without a permit, is that the processing to put the water in the bottle wastes twice as much water as gets in the bottle, further exacerbating California's drought. Okay, we got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of the program today. We're going to close the phone lines here while I tail out the show for you. Have you ever noticed that many of the same people screaming about the evils of theocratic rule in the Middle East are equally enthusiastic about bringing it about here in the United States of America, as long as it's Christian and not Muslim, because Muslim religious rule is bad, and Christian religious rule is good, and so forth and so on. We've been following the story over in Tennessee, where there was actually a bill in the legislature to make the Holy Bible the official state book of Tennessee. And it looked like it was on the verge of passing, but it got derailed, primarily because both the federal and the state constitution of Tennessee provide for the separation of church and state. When this nation was set up, there was no officially sanctioned religion, because the Founding Fathers understood that when religion is allowed civil power, the first thing it does is crush out all competing religions. And the only way you can have religious freedom for everybody is to deny civil political power to all religions. That's why it says in the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an institution of religion. And so the bill went down to defeat, and there have been similar bills in other states shot down for the same reason. We're a secular government. And we're seeing Christians trying to basically force their dogma into other areas. I mean, if you want to learn religion, there is a place to do that. It's called a church. You can go there every Sunday. You can pray. They get tax breaks. You can study all that you want to know about the imaginary playmate in the sky there. But that's not good enough. They're trying to get into the secular religion and turn it into theocratic indoctrination. And apparently there's a big stink out there coming out of Bob Jones University. They're a private Christian university. They have their own publication house, and they put out a Christian homeschooling book called Science 4. And one of the things it tries to do is say that all modern scientific theory is wrong. God created everything in 7 days and so forth. And they basically say, we know the planets did not coalesce out of dust. And how you know that is take some baby powder and throw it in the air. Does it congeal into little tiny spheres? Of course not. This proves that all the theories about the formation of the Earth and the Moon and planets are junk. That's actually the rationale in this book. Now, as you know, over in Indiana, there is this law, the RFRA fiasco, which looks like it's coming back to hurt the GOP brand at a time when they really cannot afford it. But the ultra-religious right bigots are just all fired up, and they're talking about their bigotry, their hate, not just in apocalyptic, but military terms. They're literally saying, we, the Christians, will rise up if they don't get to persecute gays. Now, my personal opinion is, if you're opposed to gay marriage, don't marry a gay. Problem solved. But look how much evil is created in the world by one group of people thinking they have some kind of a divine right to force the rest of the world to believe as they do. And I want to point out a movie that's on cable right now. It's on pay-per-view. I'm sure before too much longer it'll be on the regular unpaid cable channels. It's called The Imitation Game. My wife and I saw it. It is a very well-done movie. And it's the story about the life of a man named Alan Turing, was a brilliant mathematician who designed and built the machine which cracked Nazi Germany's Enigma code for the Allies, shortened the war by at least 2 years, may have won the war. And because he was gay, under then existent British law, he was cruelly treated, was forced to take medication to cure his homosexuality that ultimately drove him to suicide at the age of 41. Now, Benedict Cumberbatch does a great job of portraying Turing, even down to the recognizable traces of Asperger's syndrome, which many have concluded Turing suffered from. Okay. Now, I want to drop some names on you here. Walt Whitman, Oscar Wilde, Sappho, Alexander the Great, Gertrude Stein, Cole Porter, Radcliffe Hall, Socrates, Leonardo da Vinci, Coletto, Valentino, George Sand, Tchaikovsky. These are all some of our most gifted geniuses in history, and they were all gay. Now, back when I was a member of Mensa, it became very obvious that masculine, feminine are not absolutes. There is a continuum from one to the other. And the more intelligent you are, the more you combine traits of both sides in your mind. Okay? Most gay people tend to score well above the general population on IQ. There is no question Alan Turing was a brilliant man. The descendants of his code-breaking machine are still with us today. We call them computers. Many of the principles he pioneered opened the gates to the development of what were then called Turing machines. We call them computers now. This man turned the tide of war, shortened the war. Now, we are on the verge of a new world war. That is beyond question. Look at how many countries the U.S. has invaded, bombed, overthrown in the last going on 15 years. We're in a new world war. We won the last one in part because this homosexual, brilliant man broke the enemy's code. So for all of you out there who say that we should be persecuting and punishing the Jews, you could inadvertently harm or kill the one person that might bring victory about in this coming conflict. Just something you need to think about before you pick up that protest sign or start waving your holy book around and scream about the evils of somebody else's lifestyle. It's a very dangerous time. We don't dare callously discard anybody that could be of benefit in the war effort. Now, I'm kind of mixed feeling about whether we should win or lose. Obviously, as the war progresses, I'd like to be on the winning side, but I also recognize this time, this world war, it is the United States that's acting as the bad guy. And I say acting because ultimately all of these wars are created by the private central bankers. War is the bankers' richest harvest. And there is this horrible little three-step process they go through time and time again. Once they get their private central bank set up, and all of the currency in circulation begins as a loan at interest, the people will be plunged into debt until the people stop borrowing because they're paying too much in debt. At that point, the Keynesians come in and say, well, we can keep the system running. Government will borrow on behalf of the people, and without their permission, to keep the system going. And then when you reach a point where the people won't borrow anymore, and the government can't borrow anymore, and that's when the big wars get started, because wars force nations to borrow more money at interest, high interest, to fight the war. And after it's all over, to borrow even more money at interest to rebuild from the war. And when it's all over, when this little three-step scam is over, ordinary people like you and I, we have more or less what we had before, except our graveyards are a lot bigger. And we're in debt to those private central banks for another 100 years. Germany only paid off their World War I debts about 6 years ago. So of course it's time to get another one going. It's a very complex issue. I wish the world were black and white and easy to understand. It isn't. And you need to understand that. But the one thing you should be thinking about as we head into the 2016 campaign, stop listening to the slogans. Stop looking at how well the candidates are dressed. Stop listening to what they say they will do and go and look back at what they have already done, and that will tell you all you need to know about them. We have too many people in the United States who are going to vote for Hillary because she's a Democrat, because she's a woman. We have too many people who are going to vote for Rand Paul because he's Ron Paul's son, even though Rand and Ron are diametrically opposed on so many issues. This needs to be an election based on thoughtful analysis by the voters. And that is entirely up to you. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get some animation work done, pay a few bills. We will be back tomorrow, Friday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Share what you know with everyone you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.